Hello, everybody. Really glad you could come. Thank you so much for supporting Memphis Rox. We really appreciate it. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month. Uh, this is Hazel. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with her. We're super excited to be able to work with her and with Black Diamond for this webinar. I'm really excited to be here as well. So with that being said, we're gonna do about a 45-minute talk and then she's gonna take questions. So please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A box, not in the chat box. So we'll do about 15 minutes of questions and then we will do pull names for the raffle. Okay, take it away, Hazel.
Great, thanks a lot. Maybe does one of you just want to write that plan in the chat so that people who arrive late can still see what the plan is?
Yeah, I'll put it in right now.
Okay.
Because I guess people will start kind of dribbling in, won't they? Cool. All right, I'll just share my screen. 1 second. Oh, okay. Hopefully you guys can all see that. Sort this out. Okay. Great. All right. Well, thanks for that introduction, Gali. And just want to reiterate the sentiment around Mental Health Awareness Month and how honored I am to be here kind of representing Black Diamond and Memphis Rox for this webinar, and just feel very grateful that I get to be able to do this. So thanks everyone for coming and supporting Memphis Rox, but also kind of just the sentiment behind Mental Health Awareness Month as well. Okay, so I thought I'd just introduce myself a little bit first. I'm guessing that a lot of you know who I am from a professional climber perspective, but maybe some of you don't know that much about my coaching. So I thought I'd just talk about that, because then you'll understand where I'm coming from with this talk, because I'm not a mental health expert, although I am studying it. And I'm not a kind of, a therapist working in that field. So I wanted to make it clear kind of where my knowledge base is coming from, and how it is that I'm coming to share this experience with you. So I started climbing when I was 7. I don't know how old I am in this picture. I think maybe younger actually. I started, and I'm maybe younger in this photo. And you can see kind of like how terrified I am, and I didn't want to go above my dad's head for the longest time as a climber, right? So I started from this very kind of normal, somewhat fearful state in climbing, found climbing very uncomfortable. But now you see in the second photo, here I am climbing the hardest route I've ever climbed. And that's been a whole journey for me in the sport of climbing. And I feel grateful every single day that I found climbing so young, because it's given me so much. And part of what it's given me has been a psychological resilience. I feel like my pathway in climbing has also been a personal development pathway. And that's why I just think it's really wonderful that if we share climbing with people, we're not just giving people another sport, right? We're giving people this mechanism for personal development as well. So why did I become a coach? So I had this career as a professional climber, I still do. But all the way through, I've always been interested in psychology, and I've always been interested in psychology in the context of climbing. And from a very young age, I wondered a lot about how it was that some strong climbers could seemingly not do so well when they got on the rock, and how dependent our performance in climbing was on psychology. And I was very interested, I think, partially because I come from the UK, and the type of climbing that I grew up with is maybe a bit on the scary side, so track climbing with not often very many bolts or and sometimes space protection. And so psychology was even more relevant for that kind of climbing. And I kind of wondered why people weren't talking more about psychology and climbing. And so that was one of the motivations to start doing the coaching, because essentially there weren't many people working in this space. But I've also just always been fascinated in the human mind and in conscious experience and kind of the peaks and troughs of conscious experience and conscious life. And I studied a philosophy degree at Bristol University, and I focused on philosophy of mind. And so very interested in those sort of deep questions about human experience. And actually, the first time I considered coaching was actually right after university. I read Arno Illner's book, and I know that Arno Illner is doing some work with Memphis Rox for this Mental Health Awareness Week, and I totally recommend doing one of his workshops or any of the trainers that work under the Rock Warriors Way umbrella. And I read his book and I thought, wow, it totally changed my idea about psychology. And I kind of realized after reading that book, okay, this is something we can change. This is something we can work on. And so I actually ended up coaching one of my friends who was very scared of falling. And of course, it didn't work very well because I was just a climber and I just read one book, right? I hadn't really put much thought into it. And I ended up giving him his money back. And then roll on 5 years, and it took a shoulder operation for me to fully commit to the coaching. I just had the time and space in my life to go back to studying. And when I started coaching, my focus was really on fear. So the fear that distracts us when we're climbing, so fear of falling, fear of heights, that was my main focus. And through doing the coaching and focusing on teaching people how to overcome the fear of falling, I realized that a lot of the tools that someone might use to overcome fear of falling were similar tools that you might use in a mental health context. So for example, exposure therapy that you use to overcome fear of falling, so kind of gradually exposing yourself to more of the stimulus to falling, so kind of building up bigger falls. I noticed that, that kind of exposure therapy, I was reading research about exposure therapy for certain anxiety disorders. Or, another example is some of the breathing exercises or relaxation tools that you might use to help manage fear in a climbing situation were also being used in mental health contexts. So essentially through my work coaching, firstly focusing on fear of falling, I was starting to notice that a lot of the tools that we could use to manage our psychology in climbing were very relevant to mental health, and essentially they're transferable skills. I also started to notice that actually fear of falling wasn't just the only psychological distraction in climbing. People were dealing with a whole host of issues. So I knew from my own personal experience that fear of failure, imposter syndrome, issues with self-worth were things that filtered into my climbing experience, affected my climbing experience. And managing those parts of my psychology was helping me become a better person, not all the time, right? These things are challenging, but I realized that, there was a lot happening in the kind of psychological landscape of climbing personally, but I'm just one person, right? I'm just one example. But when I started coaching, I realized that lots of people were suffering with these issues, or at least exploring them, and they were coming to me for help. So they were coming to me for help with fear of failure, and with performance anxiety and anxiety in general, and fear of what other people thought. And so I realized that I probably wasn't qualified to help people with those issues. So I trained as a life coach. I didn't want to become a full psychologist, but I realized I wanted some extra learning. So I trained as a life coach, and that gave me some more skills in how to communicate with people and how to explore what's going on for people and how to help them move into a place that they can flourish more easily. And that was really great. And I also trained with an institution called the Flow Center that really focused on how to help people access flow state from a performance perspective, but also from kind of a wellness perspective as well. So I did a lot of studying with them, and then worked with them. And throughout this whole thing, it's just, I feel like I'm learning so much, and it's something that I'm really passionate about. And that's why I started a master's in January, which is the psychology and neuroscience of mental health. It's part-time and I'm fitting it around everything else, so it's going to be slow going, but I'm really enjoying it so far. But I wanted to share that's my own personal story, because I really want to make it clear where I'm coming from here. I'm not a mental health expert, and I'm not qualified to talk about serious mental health problems. But from my perspective, from any perspective, mental health and mental well-being is on a spectrum. We're not either ill or healthy, right? It's the same as our physical health. There's a spectrum of well-being. And so I'm working with clinically, mentally healthy people from a clinical perspective, but perhaps there's areas of their well-being that they'd like to improve. They'd like to move more towards a spectrum of being well and being healthy versus not. And so I think a nice analogy is saying, okay, if you've got an injury, and a very acute, serious injury, you'll see, a physiotherapist. But if you just want to be fitter, stronger, more resilient, and do something that might prevent an acute injury, you might see a trainer. So I consider myself as like a trainer, using that analogy. I'm not someone that can help anyone with a serious mental health issue, but I might help someone work towards better well-being, but also preventative well-being. And that's really important, I think. As a society, we put a lot of energy into our physical health. We abstain from drinking too much alcohol. We don't smoke. We make sure we get enough vegetables. But to what extent are we focusing our attention on our mental well-being? How can we be more psychologically resilient, so that when something happens in our life where it all gets a bit too much, do we have the strategies to be able to cope with that? So now let's bring this together with climbing. Why is climbing so good for our mental health? So, there's the other obvious things, right? So if you're doing outdoor climbing brings us closer to nature. There's so many studies out there on the positive impact that nature can have on our well-being. And then, there's the general exercise is generally good for our mental health. Again, this is pretty established in the research that exercise is really good for our mental health. I think there's a whole bunch of studies suggesting that exercise is as effective as cognitive therapy for helping people with depression. And you can, I want to talk about things that are relevant and that you can't just Google on the internet, but that's an easy one. If you're interested in kind of the mechanisms behind why exercise is good for mental health, you can easily research that yourself. Community, and obviously Memphis Rox is an absolutely prime example of how community helps people with their mental well-being. But yeah, so just engaging in a sport like climbing that has a social life connected to it is very good for our mental health. Creativity, so this is something that's more unique to climbing. Obviously the other things I've mentioned are common among many sports, but I think what's really cool about climbing is that it's a complex movement sport. It's not something like running, which is quite repetitive, and runners out there will probably kill me for saying this, but climbing is very complex, and we each bring different bodies to the wall. which requires unique problem solving. As you can see, these kids have got to get around being short. And I think that the reason, so there's studies out there to suggest that creativity, doing something creative each day, does improve mental well-being and feelings of positivity. But I just think from my own personal experience as well, is that when we are engaged in something that requires creativity or problem solving, there's a deeper level of engagement in challenge that is also more rewarding. So it feels better when we work something out. And then connected to that is this feeling of presence. So not to go into too much detail, it's hard for me this talk because there's so many avenues I could have gone down, but you know, I think that some of our mental suffering or a large portion is caused by or connected to negative thinking, rumination, overthinking. And if we can kind of puncture that sort of continuous thought with moments of presence through our day, and this is what all the mindfulness studies are suggesting now, then that's just great for our mental health. It's just wonderful for our mental well-being. And climbing helps us be present, right? When we are on the wall and we're engaged in something that's the right challenge level for us, for those moments we are present, and that's great for us. It just gives our minds a bit of a rest of not thinking about the past or future and not being cognitively drained in that way. And resilience. So, you know, we don't get stronger through comfort, okay? And that's the same physically as it is mentally. We get stronger through managing something that's uncomfortable. And climbing is a uniquely uncomfortable sport, okay? And this is what captures people, I think, into climbing, is that it doesn't feel, you know, it doesn't have that instant gratification that a lot of other things do, you know, maybe like skiing or, I don't know, it's hard to make comparisons, but, you know, I think that we have two kind of innate fears, they say. One is loud noises and one is falling or heights. So climbing really challenges our innate fear. And I don't mean just something like this that you can see in the photo, but even just going indoor bouldering for the first time, dropping off the bouldering wall onto a mat is uncomfortable for a lot of people. And to be able to manage our psychology and persevere through that discomfort helps build resilience. Okay, so there's some sort of generic reasons why climbing is good for our mental health. Perhaps you already knew all of them already, right? That many of them are quite obvious and quite basic. But it's worth noting, right? It's worth us saying and sitting back and saying, okay, I'm actually engaging in an activity here that is good for my mental well-being. But how do we maximize the mental health benefits of climbing? Or how do we prevent some negative modes of thinking that could put up barriers between us and accessing these mental health benefits? And I say this, you know, maybe for some people, they're thinking, okay, well, climbing's just good. It's only good. And I just have a great time after every session and I don't struggle with anything within climbing, and that's wonderful. But from my experience as a coach, I know that many people do struggle with climbing, and there's aspects of climbing that are not becoming good for their mental health. And I should watch my language here, because it's not the activity of climbing that's becoming bad for people's mental health. It's the modes of thinking and some of the traps that we can fall into when we do an activity like climbing. So it's kind of worth, I think, thinking about it in terms of barriers. So there's this thing that I know is really good for me, but what are some of the barriers that might be stopping me from accessing some of the mental health benefits that this activity is offering me? And I know that people with kind of severe mental health problems, this is just like a bit of a disclaimer again, some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about is not going to be relevant for people with serious mental health problems. Okay, so again, I'm talking about clinically healthy people here, falling into some certain traps or putting barriers up that are not enabling them to get these mental health benefits. And I've chosen to focus on internal barriers. Okay, so there are of course going to be a bunch of external barriers for some people, but because that's going to vary from person to person, and also you're much less likely to be able to change external barriers, I've focused here on internal barriers. And this is also what I'm familiar with working as a coach. Okay, so, and this is just a small snapshot as well, right? So the first one is kind of being overly achievement orientated. And so really this just means kind of prioritizing achievement over anything else, right? So it's prioritizing end goals, end results, and being very negative about failure. So it's very much linked to fear of failure. I know Arno calls this achievement addiction. And so it's really kind of like, you know, I'm only happy unless I'm sending, basically, is kind of the essence of that. The next is social anxiety. So real fear around what other people might be thinking about you and your climbing, or just you in general. So body image issues come into this, maybe imposter syndrome, that kind of thing. Fear of falling and fear of heights. I think that most people will struggle with fear of falling to some extent in their climbing life, but when it really starts to impinge on our mental health is when it becomes so severe that either you're not really enjoying your time on the rock anymore, or it's really stopping you from doing the things you want to be doing in climbing, or it just kind of causes this low level constant anxiety, where you start to associate climbing as a trigger of anxiety in general. And I see that quite a lot, actually. It's not uncommon. And then relying on climbing performance as a source of self-worth. So this is linked to the first one as well, but it's a bit deeper in the sense that it's like, you know, perhaps someone has issues with self-worth in general, and then perhaps at the start when they begin climbing, you know, climbing really helps their self-worth, but then as they get better, they start pairing performance with self-worth. So it's, you know, I'm only a good person if I can do well at this thing. And then that can really impinge on your mental health because, you know, for obvious reasons, but the main one being that we really need to have a more sustainable source of self-worth than our performance, right? Because our performance is so variable. Okay, so I'm now going to go into a bit more detail into these things and suggest ways that we can remove these barriers or limit their power to some extent. Of course, I don't have long and I can't kind of, you know, these are complex issues, so sort of try to be patient, and if anything doesn't feel like I've not explained anything particularly well, then that's a good opportunity to ask a question. So again, yeah, the achievement mindset. So, you know, people might think, okay, this must be a prevalent thing among professional climbers, right? And it is, but I see it throughout the diverse range of climbers, right? So I see people with an overly achievement mindset in their first year of climbing even. So this is not something that only the elite are suffering with here. And I think it's really reflects on our society in general. we tend to kind of put success above our well-being often, right? You know, it's like that's just what society teaches us. It's kind of what we learn in school to some extent. And there's huge implications of that on our mental health. I guess some of the signs are, you know, not being happy unless you feel like you've achieved something, not valuing the process, only valuing the goals. And it really drains us, and it can be very negative because we feel happy only when we've achieved, right? And then that wears off very quickly, and all of a sudden that thing that we were working towards, that achievement, you know, it doesn't feel very good anymore, and it's just on to the next one, right? So we're constantly chasing our tails. So I think, you know, what are some ways to kind of escape this kind of mindset if this does sound familiar to you or anyone you know? So I think first is kind of like coming back to the reasons why you climb in the first place, right? Do you climb to be a success, right? Do you climb to kind of be better than someone else or to feel like you're winning? Or do you climb for other reasons, right? So you could even come back to some of the mental health benefits of climbing, such as kind of being outdoors, sense of community, movement, creativity. You could come back to those as mechanisms or kind of or motivations and as reasons why you climb. And this will help shift your focus and your attention towards the experience of climbing, right? And not just these kind of end wins. Okay, so social anxiety, comparison to others, fear of what others think. You know, I think to some extent, we're always going to compare ourselves to others. We're always going to worry what others think. And I think that's normal. But when it becomes kind of, there's a mental health relevance is when there's a real cause of anxiety there. That, you know, that's quite prevalent, and it's something that you might ruminate over a lot, you might worry about a lot. And so how to manage that? I mean, with all these things, it would be really great to talk to someone about it. And if, you know, if you can't access a therapist, you're a good friend could help. Another just little mini trick that I always use is to remind yourself that most people are too self-concerned to worry about what you're doing, right? That, you know, everyone's in their own heads, and so they're not really going to be thinking about what you're doing. I also think that, you know, trying to be supportive of others and kind of really focusing on friendship and support also helps sort of put the attention on we're here as a team, we're here as a group versus I'm better than you or vice versa, right? And then also, again, coming back to the reasons why you climb, right? Is it to be better than other people or not? And I also think that with real kind of social anxiety, and this will become relevant in the next thing I talk about, but also sort of graduating your exposure to the things that really trigger you. So for example, like, you know, if there's one night in the gym where there's a group of people and you'll really get anxious around a particular group of people, kind of slowly incrementing your exposure to those sorts of triggers also really helps, and not kind of just like going straight in there. Okay, fear of falling. You know, I do whole hour-long talks on fear of falling, and even that's not long enough to talk about this. But basics are, it can really affect our experience when we're climbing. It can really affect our enjoyment of the sport, and it can even cause can cause fairly serious anxiety issues as well. If if you've got access to someone who can teach you the fall practice, that's great. So if you're in the States, the Rock Warriors Way, I think they might be actually just Warriors Way, but their clinics are really good, so I recommend them. But yeah, the key thing is fall practice, and doing it very incrementally. And this little diagram, I think, really helps. It's you might have seen it before. It's really just a metaphor. Comfort zone in yellow is sort of, where we feel comfortable, relaxing in front of a TV maybe. And then as we add stress to our experience, we enter what we might call a stretch zone. And in the stretch zone, you feel a little bit uncomfortable, but it's manageable. And the stretch zone is where learning and growth happens. Then as we add more stress, we get to our panic zone. And what defines the panic zone is that it's not controllable, it's not manageable. This is where we make very poor decisions. And if we operate in our panic zone, this shrinks our comfort zone, okay? So we experience a kind of trauma and it shrinks the comfort zones right down. So if you're someone who wasn't that comfortable with falling, maybe you were okay, and then you took a very nasty fall, maybe you hurt yourself. That's kind of an example of you entering your panic zone. And you might have noticed that actually your comfort around falling shrunk after that happened. So that would be an example of your comfort zone around falling shrinking. Again, if we just only operate in our comfort zone, we also shrink the comfort zone. So avoidance behavior around falling also shrinks the comfort zone. And if we slowly, incrementally do falls that are a little bit uncomfortable for us, this is how we stretch our comfort zone around falling. And this kind of mechanism of exposure therapy, but using this kind of metaphor to help us graduate that exposure, that all comes from the literature on anxiety disorders and phobias. So it's very well researched, and you can look up some of that stuff yourself. But I think this metaphor really helps you graduate that exposure. So really, if, with the falling, just trying to do, or really starting where you're comfortable, and then doing falls that feel a little bit uncomfortable, and then coming back into your comfort zone to rest. And there's lots more to say about the fall practice, but that's just maybe one example of how you can approach it. I would also say that this metaphor you can use for other things as well, right? So say there's, even with that social anxiety example, doing things that are slightly uncomfortable is okay, where you can still manage your psychology, but we don't want to be ever in a panic, okay? So anything that causes so much anxiety that you feel slightly panicked, it's not good to do. And this sounds really obvious, but so many people I coach are operating either in the panic zone or the comfort zone, and they're just oscillating between these two states of either sort of total comfort and avoidance behavior or panic. And what tends to happen is they'll be in their comfort zone, and then what's interesting about the comfort zone is it feels comfortable, but it's also boring, right? It's not interesting for us. And also people start to feel shame and guilt around not pushing themselves. So then that will build up, and then they'll push themselves, but they won't do it gradually, incrementally, slowly, calmly. They'll just go out there and take a massive whipper, or jump on the first trad route of the season and have it be a trad route that's too scary for them or whatever, right? So this metaphor is actually a really helpful metaphor that you can use in all sorts of different areas of your climbing. Okay, relying on climbing as a source of self-worth. Now, this is much trickier for me to talk about because it's going to be very individual for each of us, right? And it requires a lot of self-reflection to work out, where am I getting my sense of self-worth from? But perhaps, me just talking about this a little bit now could help you reflect on that a little bit. To what extent do you get your self-worth from performance in climbing? And is that, a viable source of self-worth? Is that sustainable source of self-worth? Could it be that there might be a better place for you to get your self-worth from? If I'm working with this with a coaching client, we will explore that. So just trying to find you know, a sense of self-worth that really just comes from a sense of self-kindness, and self-efficacy, and a sense that, you know, you're a deserving and valuable person, irrespective of what you may or may not be able to climb, or what you can do in relation to what your friends can do, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's difficult to talk about this one in this kind of setting. It's really something that's probably better broached conversationally, but I wanted to include it because I think it is something I see quite often, and a lot of kind of the mindset issues that I see in climbing might boil down to this in a way. So yeah, it's worth thinking about, I think. Okay, so to close up, I just have a list of general strategies for improving well-being. So to just recap a little bit, I talked about why climbing in general is good for our mental health. I talked then about a few barriers that may be preventing us from accessing some of the mental health benefits of climbing. So they're things that you might want to work on, essentially, right? Or you might want to broach with a friend. But if you don't feel like those barriers are there, you know, what else can you do to get the most out of your climbing experience, basically? And that's really kind of what I do as a coach, is I help people get the most out of their climbing experience, which then improves their well-being. You know, when I started coaching, I thought, oh, I'm going to help people climb harder. I'm going to help people climb better. But I realized straight away that what's the point of helping someone climb harder if they're not happier because of it, right? In essence, what I was really interested in was helping people become happier climbers, right? So what are some things that we can do generally to just be healthier, happier climbers from a psychological perspective? The first one is prioritizing your experience. And so sounds pretty vague, right? And maybe you don't quite get the sentiment, but it's really about saying, you know, how can I get the best experience out of my climbing, right? So it's not necessarily prioritizing goals or outcomes, or you know, I've said that I can do this, or I said I've done that, right? It's really about, okay, I'm going climbing tomorrow. What's the kind of experience that I want to have? You know, to what extent do I want to be challenged? How can I engineer it so that I'm challenged to that right level? You know, who do I want to climb with? Who are the people in my life who I have meaningful climbing days with, who I have a lot of fun with, right? So it's really about kind of taking responsibility for your own climbing life and prioritizing the actual experience, so the moment by moment experience of climbing. Second, working on dysfunctional thinking patterns, right? So if you're interested in this, if you feel like you might have kind of some habitual automatic negative thinking patterns, CBT is kind of the place to go. And there's, you know, you could either see a CBT practitioner, or you can kind of just Google it, really. And you can, there's like a list of like the different ways that you might be thinking in a dysfunctional manner. And you can kind of like go through and kind of bring your awareness to those modes of thinking, and try and replace it with better modes of thinking. So, you know, for example, like, I'm not a climber, I'm not an athlete, you know, I don't belong here, you know, that kind of, those kinds of thinking that can be prevalent. You know, and I get those thoughts sometimes, right, as a professional climber, having climbed 27 years. So, you know, it's not related to actually who you are as a climber often, but, you know, your actual internal patterns of thought. So yeah, CBT, look at that. Generally be kind to yourself. You know, it sounds a bit cliche, but it goes a long way, just saying that, you know. And I think something that helps there is starting a climbing journal that isn't just about what things you've done or you haven't done, but it's also about, you know, how did you feel? And, were you kind to yourself around that, so on reflection, sometimes we can say, okay, actually, I wasn't that kind to myself in that moment. And I think a journal can help reveal that. Getting the challenge level right. Okay, so this is really important. That metaphor I talked about with comfort zone, stretch zone, and panic zone is a good metaphor to help you do this. And part of getting the challenge level right from a psychological perspective is really starting to become more aware of our own stress responses. And climbing's great for helping us explore that, right? But it might help you to pair that with the few down, which is meditation and mindfulness. How can we build awareness around our stress responses so that we know that we're being challenged to the right level? Well, firstly, we need to build awareness, and that's where meditation and mindfulness can help. But if you want to access flow state, if you want to be engaged, if you want to improve, all of those things are dependent on you getting the challenge level right, physically and psychologically. So setting that as an intention is really useful. Gratitude exercises. I think I did an Instagram post about this recently. There's almost nothing that works well for everyone, right? When it comes to kind of therapeutic interventions or tools or strategies to help with these things. But gratitude exercise seems to have a really positive effect on everyone who tries it, or everyone who I've been coaching anyway. And so really just making a little mental list of everything that you're thankful for before you climb, or before you go to the climbing wall, or even just every morning, or just whenever you can, basically, really helps. So I personally do a gratitude exercise before every hard route that I do, because if there's any kind of performance anxiety there, the gratitude exercise just washes it clean, essentially. Because how can you possibly be worried about climbing a route when you've listed off all these things that you're grateful for? And it just puts everything into context, and you just feel really positive about things as well, which always goes a long way. Meditation, mindfulness. Okay, so having a meditation practice, I think, has wonderful benefits for mental health in general. That's what all the studies say. That's what I believe personally. Of course, it's not for everyone. Nothing is. So don't feel bad if you don't, if you're not into it. But I'd say try to persevere, right? Try, you've got to give things a first trial. Meditation is extremely hard habit to implement, but I think it is really like the skills are just really useful. And I think that some people are put off because they think that there's a religious component or a spiritual kind of new agey component to meditation, but I really disagree. I think just keep looking for the apps that suit you and your kind of values and belief systems, and you will find a teacher or an app that will fit in with your belief system, even if it's like strictly atheist, which is I consider myself an atheist. And really, like, what you're doing when you meditate is you're using your attention and kind of what you'd call like executive processes in a way that's really helpful from mental health perspective, right? So people who are vulnerable to mental health disorders, they tend more to negative things in their lives. They overthink without realizing, they ruminate. All of these things make us more vulnerable to mental health issues. Meditation strengthens our ability to attend to what we want to attend to in a kind of a non-judgmental way. So yeah, anyway, you can look up that stuff yourself, but that's just like a personal recommendation. And the last one is ask for help. And so this is very important for people who are bordering on the more serious mental health stuff. Of course, if you just want to improve your well-being and you're healthy enough, you don't have a clinically relevant mental health issue, then research your stuff online, like get a life coach or a well-being coach, or read some books. There's lots of avenues for you to explore, and that could be what asking for help is. But if you think that, you know, you are suffering with something and it's actually really affecting your life, that's when you really need to ask for help. And it's gonna, the options that are available to you are going to vary from place to place, but and it's not my place to tell you where to ask. But the sentiment behind me saying ask for help is just to say, you know, take your mental health seriously, because it really dictates everything. It's our whole conscious experience is dependent on our mental life being healthy, right? So that's kind of just the sentiment there, is, you know, really everyone deserves to be mentally healthy. So ask for help if you're struggling. Okay, so that's everything that I've had to say. Hopefully I haven't bored you, and I seem to have got the timing fairly right. So thanks for listening, and if you've got any questions, we'll move on to the Q&A.
Hazel, if you can see the Q&A, there's 4 questions. So if you want to pull it up, and then as you answer them, you can just hit that you answer them.
Okay, cool. All right, so Becky says, do you think that climbing has impacted your psychological resilience? Definitely, yeah. It's made me much more psychologically resilient for sure. But to be fair, I climbed since I was very small, so I don't really have anything to compare it to. It's not like I found climbing in later life and then said, oh yeah, I'm so much more resilient now I climb. So I'm probably maybe not the best person to ask this actually. But I know from engaging in all this stuff that I'm learning about psychology and mental health and mental training, that I do feel like I'm becoming more resilient through that learning, and that climbing is still the framework by which I do that, right? So it's like, I just think that climbing is a great way to build resilience, essentially, and it's a great way to kind of apply the tools and strategies that we can use to be resilient. You know, even if it's just something like managing your stress levels so that you're less reactive. Like climbing is so good for practicing that out, right? It's like, you know, if you can be calm on the crux of a route and where you don't want to fall, you're training for the moment in your life where you need to be calm and not say that thing that first comes to the front of your mind, right? It helps you create space. So that's just one example, I think. But yeah, maybe I'll move on. So then Rosalinda, I'm not sure I've said that right, but she asked, as a coach, what would you say to someone who is in the panic zone, and what is your thinking or process in giving yourself permission to end a climb? That's a great question. So what would I say to someone's in the panic zone? Well, unfortunately, once you're in the panic zone, unless you've very well trained, like you're someone who's worked in the military, or you've been in the panic zone a lot as a climber, which hopefully you haven't, it's very hard to do anything, right? When you're in this panic zone, you just have to manage your experience as best you can. But the thing that really defines being in a panic is that you lose control. You're kind of just a slave to your reactions, right? So what's the better question is, how do I never get into my panic zone? And in all honesty, I think I've been in my panic zone, like proper panic zone, once in my whole climbing career. And that was because well, I was sort of, it was because it looked like my partner was going to get hurt, and there was nothing I could do about it. So yeah, it's more about preventing yourself from getting there. And so really that's about when you're in your stretch zone and you notice that your stress levels are increasing, it's noticing that the stress levels are increasing and managing those stress levels. So focusing on your breath, prolonging the exhale, and even doing a bit of a sigh really helps. So it's a bit complicated. I don't want to go details, but it triggers the parasympathetic nervous system, which is kind of the alternative nervous system to the one that's triggered when you're really stressed and you're in that kind of fight or flight situation. So kind of managing your stress levels is really important. And then this segues into the second part of this question. Getting yourself out of the experience that is causing you to become more and more stressed, right? And so this is something we see in climbing a lot. It's like people's egos kind of get in the way, essentially, and they say, I should be able to do this. I can do this. And part of that comes from a good place, right? It comes from this courageous place, and we tend to celebrate that. But if you're just getting more and more stressed and you're approaching your panic zone, there's nothing helpful about that situation for you. You're not really learning anything anymore. You're certainly not having a good time anymore. And so that's the time when you give the permission to end a climb, and hopefully you can. Some climbs are so committing that you can't end them, but most aren't, right? So that's when you take a step back. But what's important to do in that moment is, what people often do is when they approach panic, they take a step back, and that could be saying take, for example. They say take. And then what often happens is that they totally disengage from the challenge whatsoever. Take me to the ground. I want out of here. The better thing to do is to say take a moment, breathe, try to relax, try to be present. And maybe in those moments you realize that actually you're okay where you are and you can manage your experience. And then maybe if the reason you were panicking is because you were scared of falling, maybe you would do some very small practice falls there, something like that. And then maybe you're over it and you're done and you come down. But the idea is that you operated in your stretch zone for a certain amount of time, and that's where all the growth and learning happens. But if you get close to your panic zone and then you totally disengage in the challenge and you go right back into your comfort zone, then you're not getting that chance to grow and learn. And what you're doing is you're essentially kind of shrinking your comfort zone again, right? So yeah, but again, the whole permission to end a climb, I think people should give that to themselves more often, actually. Okay, next question from Danny. How can we distinguish passion from obsession in climbing or elsewhere? So many climbers seem so obsessed by the activity. P.S. Fell running is not quite repetitive. Yeah, sorry to all the runners out there that I said repetitive, but it seems repetitive when compared to climbing. Okay, how do we distinguish passion from obsession? Okay, well, and I think the thing at the heart of the answer to this question is the whole topic of this talk, and that's mental health. When you feel like your mental health is being affected adversely, that's when it becomes a kind of negative obsession. That's when it becomes something that you should be thinking about, and you should you should broach with yourself and reflect on and potentially see help, right? It's like you're doing this thing, and if it's not improving your well-being, then why? Why are you still doing it? And so yeah, that I think that's at the heart of that. And I think from the outside, some climbers, maybe they look obsessed in a negative way, but actually they're not. Actually it's all still quite positive. So it's good to not judge other people. We don't know where people are at with this. But if you yourself feel like your obsession is affecting you negatively, then that's when it's something to think about. Dusty, can you tell us about a climber event that knocked your confidence down, and how did you overcome? Okay, hard when there's always specific examples. Well, I guess I could talk about, so in the UK, we don't have much crack climbing, and all the climbing that I had done in the UK, I hadn't really done any cracks. Sort of growing up, I climbed mostly on limestone. And when I went traveling around the world, when I left university, I obviously came across cracks. And at this point in my climbing, you know, I was probably on sighting 512 trad, and I couldn't climb like a 5/8 crack. And so obviously this knocked my confidence a lot. And you know, I basically felt like I was a beginner again, and I hadn't been a beginner since I was 6 years old. So it really knocked my confidence. But you know, I don't know if I've got anything that's that kind of poignant to say about this, other than like, you know, I just put in the work to get better, right? Like it was challenging and it knocked my confidence, but you know, I put in the work, and I kind of, you know, it's difficult because when people say knocked your confidence, sometimes they mean knocked your ego, and it's difficult to pull the two apart. My ego was knocked, right? And so that's not necessarily a bad thing if you can deal with it, right? Sometimes it's quite useful from a kind of resilience and mental health perspective to not give your ego a good bruising. And that's what happened. And actually I think that the whole experience was just positive for me, even though it felt very challenging at the time. I know that might not be answering exactly what you wanted from the question, but I'm just going to go with that. Erin, with all your experience, are you still afraid of falling? The answer is sometimes, yes, for sure. You know, like after lockdown and everything that we've just had here in the UK, I was only bouldering, and the first time I went climbing, I definitely had to do some fall practice to feel confident. And you know, just went to Pembroke recently, trad climbing, and had to do some fall practice on gear. So yeah, I do still feel afraid to fall sometimes, for sure. But I don't worry about it at all, because I know I've got the tools to help manage it, which is the fall practice. So it's not something I spend too much time worried about, actually. Like if I notice, and I've built up so much awareness of my climbing and my psychology over the years, that I notice straight away when I'm scared to fall. And it's only laziness that's going to stop me from doing something about it. So yeah, that's the answer to that one. Okay, anonymous attendee. I struggle with going to the bouldering wall as I hate the whole gym culture. Very triggering for body image issues and past over exercising, eating disorder thoughts. I feel like I would be so beneficial to be stronger for my trad climbing, which I love and makes me feel empowered. Have you got any tips for how to overcome comparison and avoid being swept into triggering thoughts? Okay, I mean, it's pretty hard for me to answer that question, I would say. But I think that everything that I talked about, or most of the stuff I've talked about in this talk, will help with that. I think first, you know, maybe the most important thing is, you know, I don't know your personal experience, but this could be like seeing a therapist could be a good option here, given that you've mentioned over exercising and eating disordered thoughts. I haven't mentioned eating disorders, which is probably the most prevalent mental health problem that's very relevant to climbing. I didn't mention it because I didn't feel, you know, like I have the relevant expertise to talk about it, and it is a serious mental health problem, and I didn't feel like I had the expertise. But you know, I guess if you don't feel like that's a serious issue for you, I would say using the metaphor of operating in your stretch zone would be really useful here. So, you know, there's something that's triggering something in you. What you're going to do, you're either going to jump in the deep end and just maximum exposure, or you're going to totally avoid it. I would say, you want to incrementally expose yourself to these triggering circumstances. So, spending short amounts of time in the gym when there's not many people there, for example, might be a first step. And I think also like talking to people, and I'm an introvert, and I know the feeling of kind of seeing people that I don't know and as strangers, and feeling like it's almost threatening. But as soon as you talk to someone, that breaks down, right? Making connections with people that are on a human to human level. They're not on a climber to climber level. They're not on a your body and my body level. They're on a comparison level. They're on just a human connection level. Like, how was your day? Are you enjoying the weather? Like, isn't it so wonderful that we can come to this climbing gym, and many places the climbing gyms are closed? I think that really helps, because then the fear of others breaks down when you make those kind of connections. So there's just a few things, but I would say that it is very difficult for me to answer that specific question. Golden Octopus. How do you know where the stretch zone is? Also, when do we get to watch you climb Magic Line? So just Magic Line, there's no video of me doing it, I'm afraid, sorry. But there is a great video of Lonnie Kalk doing it, which I love. So you could watch that. The stretch zone, yeah. So this is really about building awareness of what I call the indicators of stress. So tension in the body, our breathing changes when we feel stressed. It gets more shallow and it speeds up. Our eyes kind of dart around everywhere when we're stressed. And we often get kind of sensations in the body, maybe associated with fear or anxiety, maybe a pressure on the chest, something like that. I think they're the four main indicators of stress. Maybe also negative thoughts as well. And so really knowing where your stretch zone is building awareness around that. And that's actually one of the really wonderful things about engaging in the fall practice, is that you taking this kind of practice scenario and essentially learning what those indicators are. So, you're comfortable, you do a fall that's maybe ropes clicked above your head and you feel very comfortable with that. You're not getting any of those indicators. And then you go a tiny bit higher and all of a sudden you notice your breath change. And because you're in this practice space, you're so much more able to notice those changes. So that's why I'd recommend the fall practice. Even if you're not especially scared of falling, it's actually kind of just a nice way of kind of getting close up to those indicators of stress. But yeah, I mean, the main one is like start trying to notice what's going on in mind and body, especially body. The physiological indicators of stress they don't lie, so if we can get closer to them, then we're much more aware of where we are in relation to our comfort zone. Okay, there's quite a lot of questions. I hope we can get through them all. Okay, so I don't know how to say this name. Jiri, maybe? Sorry, I know that's probably wrong. Okay, so how do I know that I'm in the zone of proximal development or the stretch zone? Oh, I've just answered this, I think. How much scared should I be during a fall practice? I can take big falls, not in panic zone, and I still feel like this has been counterproductive. Okay, so the thing is, right, I'm not quite sure what the question get at, but if you take a big fall and you're very tense and you're stressed out when you take that big fall, what you're doing is you're ingraining an association in your mind that the thing that you're doing is stressful, it's negative, it's threatening. So that's why, doing a relaxation exercise like breathing out as you fall helps make a more positive association. We want to start making associations with falling that are positive, right? we need to be having good, positive, relaxing experiences when we fall in order to have falling be a non-threatening thing in our mind. So if we force ourselves to take a big fall and we're actually tense and nervous, we're formulating that association. The other thing that might be going wrong, where maybe you are relaxed when you're taking a big fall, but the thing that you struggle with is losing control. So some people who do the fall practice, they're very happy to do the fall practice, take all these falls, but it doesn't work for them because when they're on the route, there's this uncertainty there. Whereas in the practice, they know they're going to fall and they're prepared to fall. So you can do something which is B-layer controlled falls. You have to do it very safely with someone you trust. The idea is that the B-layer will just say fall and you have to fall when they say. So it's basically you're bringing that uncertainty back in. You're not in control anymore. So yeah, there's a few ideas. Kenzie, if you have taken a bad fall that potentially put you in a panic zone surrounding falls in the future and experience a smaller comfort zone as a result, can you return to a healthy comfort zone and outlook around falls on your own, or should you work with a coach to re-expand the comfort zone? I think you could do it on your own, but I think you need to be equipped with the right knowledge. So you'll have had some ideas from this talk today. I think ideally you would go to a workshop with someone, but I don't think it's impossible for you to do it on your own. Sam, tips for achieving climbing goals, but not becoming overly achievement orientated. How do you find that balance? Yeah, that's a good question. So I think what's nice is you can have end goals, but you have process goals underlying your end goals. So that basically it's like so sorry, I'll backtrack a bit. I think the alternative mindset that's good to have, that's not overly achievement orientated, is a mastery mindset. That's what I call it. And essentially, you're basically sort of, you want to become a master of climbing, right? You want to, and it sounds a bit funny, but and it comes from sort of some of the more martial arts ideas around that. But you're saying to yourself, I want to master this sport, and that journey of mastery is never ending. And I might set benchmarks and goals to help that journey, to help direct my energy and my focus and my attention. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with goals, and there's nothing wrong with working towards goals. But if you have process goals underlying your end goals, it helps you stay focused in the process and help you stay committed to your intention of mastery rather than just achievement and success. Okay, so for example, you might have noticed that one of the things that you need to work on as a climber is slab climbing, for example. You're very good at steep climbing, but you're not very good at technical slab climbing. So you might set a goal to climb a certain slab route that you know will be challenging for you. And yeah, you'll feel a sense of success if you achieve that goal and you're working towards it, and it will be an achievement if you do it, right? But the whole point of the goal is that in the process of working this route and practicing on this route and climbing this route, you'll be a better slab climber, and therefore you'll have kind of traveled a little bit further on your path to mastery. There's really a bit of like a mindset shift to kind of the bigger picture and thinking less about kind of ego wins and more about this is a journey that I am invested in because of the intrinsic value of kind of being a master of this thing. Okay, don't know if that's helped you, but there you go. Jennifer Young, do you have recommendations for how to fight imposter syndrome arising from big regressions in climbing progress, especially with limited access to climbing due to the pandemic, with no clearly foreseeable end? Yeah, that's difficult. I guess, there's a few things going on there, but to make it specific to imposter syndrome, I think the biggest thing that comes to mind there is be kind to yourself. If you can't climb because there's a global pandemic going on, I mean, of course you're going to see regressions in your climbing. And then also say, it's easy to slip into kind of imposter syndrome mentality, and it's sort of, to what sense do you give that weight? I've struggled with imposter syndrome a lot in my climbing life as a professional climber, and I think over the years, one thing that's helped me is just to accept that it's there. It's sort of like, this little demon that lives in your head that is going to come up from time to time. But so long as it doesn't affect your decision making, it's when it stops you from doing the things that you really want to do. That's when you really kind of need to take control of that demon and work on it. But yeah, I think the biggest one there is be kind to yourself. And I think gratitude exercise would really help in this instant as well. What are you grateful for? And I think given the global situation, we're all struggling, but I think we've all been, what we have that we feel grateful for has also been revealed to us as well. So yeah, hopefully that helps. And I should just say, like, we've gone over time. Should I keep answering these, Carly, or should we leave some questions, or
Yeah, so we can, if you would like to answer all of these questions, I can copy them over into a document and we can answer them via email later. Any of the ones that aren't repeats, or if you want to just do one more and then we can go ahead and do the raffle, up to you.
Okay, hang on, let me just see this one. Yeah, okay, I'll answer Anne's question, and then maybe you could just copy them over to me.
Yeah.
Okay. So Anne's question is, when are you trying to get better? When are you trying to get better by challenging yourself, and when are you accepting that maybe some stuff in climbing is too scary for you? For example, in being more comfortable with lead climbing. I think, this part of that question, some stuff in climbing is too scary for you. I'd say that that's sort of indicative as quite a fixed mindset. It might be too scary for you right now, but it might not be in the future. And that's what you're working towards. And how you work towards it is through this very incremental graduated approach. So, maybe lead climbing is too scary for you right now, but maybe you can start by doing very comfortable lead climbs with the bolts that are very close together in the gym, maybe, or you could start trying to fall off more on top rope. So, yeah, don't limit yourself by saying that something is too scary for you. Yeah, I don't know if you need to build acceptance around that. Of course, we can build acceptance around taking big risks, and I know where my boundary is there. But really, it's about engaging in the process and not thinking too far ahead about what might or might not be available to you. It's more about kind of the practice and the process. Thanks for those questions. They were all really good. I've enjoyed answering them. Sorry I haven't got the time to answer all of them, but I'll try to do so via written word if Bali sends them over to me.
Yeah, I just copied them all over. So we're gonna now do the raffle. So just to explain to everybody else how it's gonna work. So I basically pulled an Excel spreadsheet of everybody who registered. So you entered into the raffle if you donated $5. So for every $5 that you donated after the first 5, you got your name duplicated. I am going to randomize this Excel sheet, and then we have 318 people, basically. And so Hazel is going to pick a number 1 through 318, and those will be our prize winners. And then Jess Powell will be calling out the name of the prize. Hazel will call out the number, and then I'll find the name that coordinates to that number. So
Perfect. I'll start with announcing the prizes. Also, you guys, if you want to jet, if you are not here, you still win the prize. I'm going to follow up and reach out via email to get your specifics and your shipping address and things like that. So since we are already over time, if you guys need to jet, feel free. The first prize that we're going to raffle off for is one of our fine line stretch rain shells. So if Hazel wants to pick a random number.
3, first of all, it's my lucky number.
3. Okay. Hold on, sorry. I accidentally hit one of the columns that I needed. Okay. 3 is going to be 3. Okay. Lisa Steckman.
Yay, Lisa.
I see her
Okay,
there.
she's here.
Yeah.
And then the next prize is going to be a pair of our Aspect climbing shoes.
So 215.
So that one is going to be Rebecca Harrington.
Awesome. Congratulations, Rebecca. Okay, the next prize is going to be one of our new duffels, the Stone Holler Pro 45, which is made from recycled materials. And the number is
15.
15.
Hold on one second. I'm sorry if I say your last name right. Caesar Abueg.
Awesome. Congratulations, Caesar. The next one is for one of my favorite jackets we make, the First Light Hybrid jacket. And the number is
300.
Hold on. Scrolling down. $300 is Priya Walters.
perfect. Congratulations. And we're getting close to the grand prize, guys. Stay with us. The next one is for a pair of our Session Approach shoes.
200.
Aaron Dubrava.
Nice. Okay, and then we're going to do one of our Gym 30 gear bags.
263.
Scott Strong.
Congratulations, Scott. We're going to do one more of those duffels, the Stone Holler Pro 45.
270.
Michael Walenta.
Congratulations, Michael. We're going to do a Street Creek 24 pack.
180.
Jason Weber.
Perfect. And a Circuit Crash Pad.
36.
Leah Romer.
Perfect. Congratulations, Leah. And this is for our grand prize, which includes one of our new AirNet harnesses, 2 quick packs of the Lightwire Quick Draw, which will be 12 draws, a Vapor helmet, a pair of the Mission LT approach shoes, and a Creek 35.
Nice. I'll take 100 for that.
Jessica Moon.
Congratulations, Jessica. Okay, guys, just to follow up, if you are a winner, I'll be reaching out to you guys today or tomorrow to get your specifics, your sizes, your colors, and your shipping address. So thank you all again for being here. A special thanks to Hazel for donating her time and knowledge and expertise to benefit Memphis Rox and to benefit all of us that are here. So thanks again, Hazel, for being here and doing that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks you guys for bringing this together for sure. Thanks for the organization and BD sponsoring the event and Memphis Rox putting on a whole month of these events. So yeah, I just say to check out the other events as well, because there looks like a great list.
Sweet. Thank you all for coming out and supporting us. The schedule of our events is on our website, memphisrox.org. We do have a few other online events, so you can tune in from wherever you are in the world. Thank you, Hazel, so much. Thank you, Jess, for all your hard work, and thank you guys for attending.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.